crocodile paradox. The crocodile paradox is an ancient logical dilemma that plays with self-reference, contradiction, and the nature of truth. It is a classic example of how language and logic can create unsolvable problems. The paradox is set in motion with a simple but puzzling scenario. A crocodile has captured a child and offers to return the child only if the parent correctly guesses what the crocodile will do next. If the parent says the crocodile will return the child and the crocodile had actually planned to keep the child, the contradiction arises. Should the crocodile now return the child or keep it? Conversely, if the parent predicts that the child will not be returned and the crocodile had intended to return the child, the paradox presents the same dilemma. No matter how we analyze it, the scenario leads to a logical contradiction, making it impossible to resolve. This paradox can be traced back to classical logic and philosophy, illustrating the difficulties of self-referential statements. The fundamental problem lies in the nature of conditional promises. If the crocodile is bound by its words, but also has the freedom to act differently, it creates an unsolvable loop. This is similar to other famous paradoxes, such as the liar paradox, where a statement like, "This sentence is false," creates a contradiction because it cannot be consistently labeled as true or false. The crocodile paradox challenges our understanding of how truth and logic operate, highlighting how language can be manipulated to produce endless cycles of reasoning. Beyond its surface-level contradiction, the crocodile paradox has deep philosophical implications. It exposes the limitations of binary thinking, the idea that something must be either true or false. In real-world scenarios, many problems do not have a single correct answer, and this paradox serves as a reminder of the complexity of decision-making. Philosophers have long debated whether truth can always be determined in rigid logical structures or whether some statements inherently resist classification. The paradox also relates to game theory, where decision-making involves predicting the actions of others. If one party's decision depends entirely on the anticipated choice of another, it creates a feedback loop of uncertainty, mirroring the way the crocodile's decision is entangled with the parent's guess. In practical terms, the paradox reflects the complexity of negotiation, trust, and deception. It resembles real-world situations where individuals or institutions make conditional promises, often leading to ethical dilemmas and strategic decision-making. For example, in legal and political settings, parties may make conditional statements that depend on uncertain future events, creating conflicts in interpretation. Similarly, in psychology, the paradox highlights how our expectations shape our reasoning, sometimes leading to cognitive dissonance, a psychological state where contradictory beliefs or information create mental discomfort. The crocodile paradox exemplifies how human thought can be trapped in loops of contradiction, reinforcing the idea that not all problems have clear-cut solutions. The paradox also shares similarities with concepts in quantum mechanics, where the act of observation influences the outcome. In Schrödinger's cat thought experiment, a cat inside a box is both alive and dead until observed. Much like how the fate of the child in the crocodile scenario is suspended in uncertainty. This raises the question of whether reality is truly objective or if perception plays a fundamental role in shaping outcomes. From a linguistic perspective, the paradox also demonstrates the limits of language when dealing with self-referential statements. Some problems arise not because of inherent logical flaws, but because of how we structure language itself. The crocodile statement, in essence, creates a self-referential loop, making it impossible to apply conventional reasoning without falling into contradiction. In the last, the crocodile paradox remains a fascinating illustration of how logic, language, and decision-making intertwine. It serves as a reminder that not everything can be resolved through simple reasoning, and that some dilemmas will always challenge our understanding of truth. It pushes us to think critically about the nature of promises, predictions, and paradoxes, demonstrating the power and limitations of human logic. As we move on to the next paradox, keep in mind how easily certainty can dissolve into uncertainty, and how the most perplexing problems often lie at the heart of everyday reasoning. 2. Friendship paradox. Have you ever felt like your friends seem to have more friends than you do? If so, you're not alone. This is a well-documented phenomenon called the friendship paradox. First identified by sociologist Scott L. Feld in 1991, the paradox states that, on average, your friends have more friends than you do. It sounds strange, but it's a mathematically proven concept that arises due to the way social networks are structured. But why does this happen, and what are its implications? Let's dive deeper. To understand the friendship paradox, imagine a social network graph where each person is represented as a node, and friendships are the connections between them. Those who have more friends appear in more social circles, meaning they are more likely to be counted when we measure the average number of friends that one's friends have. Essentially, people with more friends contribute disproportionately to the friend counts of others, making it appear as though your friends are more socially connected than you are. This paradox has significant psychological implications. Many people may feel like they are less popular or socially active when comparing themselves to their peers. Social media has only intensified this effect. Studies have shown that people who frequently engage with platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter are more likely to perceive others as having richer social lives than they do. Since we usually see the most active and connected people online, it reinforces the idea that everyone is more social than we are, which can lead to feelings of loneliness, low self-esteem, and even anxiety. From a scientific perspective, the friendship paradox has been studied in relation to social influence and public health. Researchers have found that individuals with more social connections are often the first to experience trends, whether in fashion, technology, or even the spread of diseases. In epidemiology, scientists have used the paradox to predict outbreaks by monitoring well-connected individuals who are likely to be exposed to infections earlier than the general population. By focusing on these individuals, health officials can gain an early warning system for tracking the spread of illnesses. Similarly, marketing experts have leveraged the friendship paradox to maximize their outreach. Influencer marketing is built on the idea that people with more social connections have a wider reach, making them ideal for spreading brand messages. This is why companies invest heavily in influencer partnerships, as their endorsements tend to reach a larger audience more effectively than traditional advertising. Beyond just friendships, this paradox extends to other aspects of life. A study published in Nature found that people often believe their friends are wealthier, happier, and more successful than they are. This psychological distortion can lead to feelings of dissatisfaction and envy. In reality, this is simply a network effect. Those who are more successful are more likely to be visible and connected to multiple social circles. So, how can we counter the negative effects of the friendship paradox? Psychologists suggest focusing on the quality of friendships rather than sheer numbers. Studies indicate that having a few meaningful relationships is far more beneficial to one's mental well-being than having a large number of acquaintances. Additionally, reducing social media consumption and engaging in offline interactions can help prevent feelings of inadequacy. In the last, the friendship paradox is a fascinating insight into human social structures. While it may sometimes create misleading perceptions, understanding its mechanics can help us navigate social interactions with greater awareness. Whether in psychology, epidemiology, or marketing, this paradox has broad implications that extend far beyond simple friendships. By being mindful of its effects, we can maintain a healthier perspective on our social lives and focus on building genuine connections rather than comparing ourselves to others. 3. Tolerance paradox. The tolerance paradox is a philosophical and socio-political concept that challenges our understanding of tolerance in an open society. First introduced by philosopher Karl Popper in his book The Open Society and Its Enemies, 1945, this paradox raises a crucial question. Should a tolerant society tolerate intolerance? At first, it seems logical that tolerance should be extended to all, but upon deeper analysis, we realize that unlimited tolerance can lead to the downfall of a tolerant society itself. Let's explore this paradox in detail. At its core, the tolerance paradox states that if a society allows the existence of extreme intolerance without limitation, the intolerant individuals or groups may eventually overpower and suppress tolerance itself. Popper argued that when intolerance is tolerated without restrictions, it can become dominant, leading to the suppression of those who are genuinely tolerant. This presents an ethical dilemma. How do we balance free speech and tolerance while ensuring that tolerance itself is not eradicated by those who seek to destroy it? To better understand this paradox, consider historical and contemporary examples. In the 20th century, totalitarian regimes such as Nazi Germany rose to power by initially taking advantage of the democratic freedoms in their societies. Hitler's rise to power in Germany demonstrated how extremist ideologies could exploit a tolerant system to ultimately dismantle it. Once in control, these regimes eliminated opposing views, effectively abolishing the very tolerance that allowed them to gain influence in the first place. In modern times, the tolerance paradox is often discussed in relation to free speech and social justice. Democracies today grapple with the question of whether hate speech should be tolerated under the principle of free expression. While freedom of speech is a fundamental right, some argue that unchecked hate speech fosters discrimination, radicalization, and violence, ultimately threatening the fabric of a tolerant society. Social media has amplified this challenge as extremist ideologies and misinformation spread rapidly, making it difficult for governments and institutions to strike a balance between upholding free speech and curbing harmful intolerance. Philosophers and political scientists propose different solutions to this paradox. Popper himself suggested that while most forms of intolerance should be countered through rational debate and education, there may be instances where society must actively suppress intolerant ideologies if they pose an existential threat to democracy and human rights. This means that societies must carefully regulate how they handle intolerant groups without becoming oppressive themselves. Legal systems in different countries have adopted varying approaches to this issue. In the United States, free speech laws under the First Amendment allow even highly controversial and intolerant speech, unless it incites immediate violence. In contrast, European nations such as Germany and France have stricter laws against hate speech and Holocaust denial, stemming from historical lessons of how unchecked intolerance can lead to catastrophic consequences. Another perspective comes from game theory and social psychology. Studies have shown that tolerating extreme intolerance can lead to increased polarization as people retreat into ideological echo chambers. Research also suggests that human societies function best when there are clear boundaries against harmful intolerance, reinforcing the idea that tolerance must sometimes be defended through firm measures rather than passive acceptance. So, what can we take away from the tolerance paradox? First, understanding that tolerance does not mean allowing all viewpoints to flourish without restriction is crucial. Second, societies must be vigilant in identifying when intolerance poses a genuine threat to democratic values and social cohesion. Third, fostering education, open dialogue, and civic responsibility can help strike a balance between freedom and protection. In the last, the tolerance paradox is a powerful reminder that tolerance is not an absolute, unconditional virtue. It must be defended wisely, ensuring that those who seek to undermine it do not gain the upper hand. By acknowledging this paradox and applying it in policymaking, education, and public discourse, societies can work towards a more just and stable coexistence, where tolerance is upheld without allowing it to become its own downfall. 4. Paradox of choice. The paradox of choice is a psychological concept that challenges the common belief that more choices lead to greater satisfaction. Introduced by psychologist Barry Schwartz in his 2004 book, The Paradox of Choice: Why More is Less. This idea suggests that an abundance of options can lead to decision paralysis, increased anxiety, and ultimately lower satisfaction. In a world where consumers have more choices than ever before, from the hundreds of cereal brands in a grocery store to the overwhelming number of streaming services, understanding this paradox is crucial in both personal decision-making and broader economic contexts. At first glance, having more choices seems beneficial. The ability to choose is associated with freedom, individuality, and autonomy. However, research indicates that an overabundance of options can be overwhelming. Schwartz and other psychologists argue that when people are presented with too many choices, they struggle to make a decision and often feel less satisfied with the decision they ultimately make. This phenomenon can be broken down into several key psychological effects. One major factor in the paradox of choice is decision paralysis. When faced with too many options, people may feel overwhelmed and postpone making a decision altogether. A famous study by psychologists Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper in 2000 demonstrated this effect. In their experiment, customers in a supermarket were presented with either 6 or 24 varieties of jam to sample. While more people were initially attracted to the larger selection, those given fewer choices were significantly more likely to make a purchase. This study suggests that too many options can lead to inaction rather than empowerment. Another issue is increased regret and dissatisfaction. When consumers make a choice among many options, they are more likely to wonder if another option might have been better. This can lead to buyer's remorse, the feeling of regret after making a purchase. For example, if someone buys a smartphone but later learns about another model with slightly better features, they may feel dissatisfied with their original choice, even if it was a good one. The more options available, the higher the probability that an individual will question their decision. Additionally, the paradox is tied to the expectation gap. When choices are limited, people tend to set realistic expectations and are more likely to be satisfied with their decision. However, when faced with an abundance of options, expectations rise. If reality does not meet these inflated expectations, disappointment follows. For example, if a person is choosing from 100 different vacation destinations, they may envision a perfect trip. If the trip turns out to be anything less than extraordinary, they may feel dissatisfied, even if it was objectively enjoyable. The paradox of choice also affects mental well-being. Schwartz and other psychologists have found that people who constantly seek the best option, known as maximizers, tend to experience higher levels of stress, anxiety, and unhappiness, compared to those who settle for good enough choices, known as satisficers. Maximizers analyze every possible option in depth, fearing they might miss out on the best one. This exhaustive process not only drains mental energy, but also leads to lower satisfaction because there is always the possibility of having made a better choice. This paradox extends beyond consumer behavior. It applies to various aspects of life, such as relationships, careers, and even entertainment. Online dating platforms, for instance, provide an overwhelming number of potential partners, leading some people to struggle with commitment or feel dissatisfied even after finding a good match. Similarly, job seekers with too many career paths may feel uncertain and anxious about choosing the right one, delaying decisions and missing opportunities. So, how can individuals and businesses mitigate the negative effects of the paradox of choice? One strategy is limiting options. Studies show that when companies streamline their product offerings, customers feel less overwhelmed and are more likely to make a purchase. For individuals, adopting a mindset of good enough rather than perfect can help reduce stress. Making decisions based on core needs rather than exploring every possibility can lead to greater overall happiness. Another approach is creating decision rules, predefined criteria that simplify choices. For example, someone shopping for a laptop might decide in advance that they will choose a model with at least 16 gigabytes of RAM and a battery life of 10 hours, rather than comparing hundreds of different specifications. In the last, the paradox of choice highlights the psychological burden of excessive options. While having choices is essential for autonomy and happiness, too many choices can have the opposite effect, leading to anxiety, indecision, and dissatisfaction. By recognizing this paradox and adopting strategies to manage it, we can make better, more satisfying decisions and ultimately lead happier lives. 5. Value paradox. The value paradox is a fascinating concept that challenges our understanding of worth, perception, and economic decision-making. It occurs when something that appears to be more useful or desirable is valued less than something that seems less useful or less essential. This paradox is widely observed in economics, marketing, and consumer behavior, affecting everything from pricing strategies to cultural perceptions of worth. One of the most well-known examples of the value paradox is the diamond water paradox, first introduced by economist Adam Smith, which questions why diamonds, which are non-essential, are valued far more than water, which is essential for survival. The diamond water paradox. At the heart of the value paradox lies a fundamental economic question. Why are some non-essential items, such as luxury goods, highly valued, while necessities, such as food or water, are often cheap? The diamond water paradox illustrates this contradiction. Water is vital for human survival, yet it is relatively inexpensive in most places, whereas diamonds, which serve no essential function, are extremely costly. This can be explained by the difference between total utility and marginal utility. While the total utility of water is immense because it is necessary for life, its marginal utility, the additional satisfaction gained from consuming one more unit, is low due to its abundance. Conversely, diamonds are rare, and their marginal utility is high because obtaining one is difficult. This discrepancy in marginal utility leads to a higher market price for diamonds despite their lower total utility. Psychological and perceived value. Another key factor in the value paradox is the role of perceived value. Psychological studies have shown that people often associate price with quality. For instance, in blind taste tests, individuals frequently cannot distinguish between expensive and inexpensive wine. Yet when they know the price, they report preferring the more expensive option. This suggests that perception, branding, and exclusivity play a significant role in how value is determined. Marketers exploit this paradox. Through strategic branding, luxury brands price their products high, not because of intrinsic superiority, but to create an aura of exclusivity and prestige. The perception of scarcity and premium pricing makes the product more desirable, reinforcing the paradox that people often equate higher cost with higher value, even when practical use does not justify the price. Economic implications of the value paradox. The value paradox also affects broader economic decision-making. Companies leverage it by positioning products as high value through branding and marketing rather than utility. Apple, for example, employs this strategy by creating high-priced products that emphasize design, exclusivity, and user experience over mere functionality. While cheaper alternatives may offer similar technical specifications, consumers willingly pay a premium for the perceived value associated with the Apple brand. Similarly, the paradox is evident in the labor market. Professions that are essential for society, such as teaching or nursing, often have lower salaries compared to entertainment or professional sports, which are not necessary for survival. The scarcity of elite athletes, combined with their entertainment value, results in multi-million-dollar salaries, while essential workers, despite their undeniable utility, receive relatively lower compensation. Cultural and societal perspectives on value. The value paradox extends beyond economics into cultural and social domains. Historical artifacts, art, and collectibles are often valued not for their practical use, but for their cultural significance and rarity. The Mona Lisa, for instance, is just a painting, yet it is worth hundreds of millions of dollars due to its history, artistic significance, and scarcity. Furthermore, social norms influence perceptions of value. In some cultures, gold is considered the ultimate store of value, while in others, cryptocurrencies or real estate hold that position. The value of money itself is paradoxical. Paper currency has little intrinsic worth, yet it functions as a medium of exchange because of collective belief in its value, resolving the value paradox. Understanding the value paradox requires recognizing that value is not solely based on practical utility, but is influenced by scarcity, perception, and social constructs. People and businesses can navigate this paradox by focusing on positioning, branding, and strategic pricing. Consumers, in turn, can make more informed choices by questioning whether higher prices truly reflect greater value, or if they are driven by psychological biases. In the last, the value paradox demonstrates that worth is often subjective, influenced by scarcity, perception, and cultural context, rather than inherent usefulness. By acknowledging these factors, individuals and businesses can make more rational decisions about value, price, and worth in a complex world where perception often outweighs reality. 6. Paradox of thrift. The paradox of thrift is a fascinating economic concept that reveals an unintended consequence of widespread saving. At its core, it suggests that while saving money is beneficial for individuals, if everyone saves excessively, it can harm the economy as a whole. This paradox, introduced by economist John Maynard Keynes, highlights the counterintuitive reality that increased saving during economic downturns can actually lead to slower growth, job losses, and prolonged recessions. Imagine a small town where everyone decides to save more money due to economic uncertainty. Businesses, noticing a decline in customer spending, reduce their production, leading to job cuts and lower wages. As more people lose their jobs or earn less, their ability to spend decreases even further. What initially seemed like a responsible financial decision, saving money, ends up reducing overall demand, which in turn shrinks the economy. This is the essence of the paradox of thrift. What is rational on an individual level can be collectively detrimental. Historically, this paradox has played a significant role during economic crises. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, for example, fear led people to save more and spend less. However, this widespread reduction in spending deepened the economic downturn as businesses struggled to stay afloat and unemployment soared. The same phenomenon occurred during the 2008 financial crisis when consumer confidence plummeted, leading to reduced spending and slower economic recovery. Governments and economists often counteract this paradox by encouraging spending through fiscal policies such as tax cuts, stimulus checks, or public investments. These measures aim to inject money back into the economy, ensuring businesses remain operational and employment rates stay stable. In contrast, when savings accumulate without being reinvested, the flow of money slows, affecting economic growth. Psychologically, the paradox also highlights the tension between short-term security and long-term prosperity. While saving provides a personal safety net, excessive caution can weaken the broader financial system. A balance between saving and spending is essential for economic stability. If individuals save responsibly while still contributing to the economy through purchasing goods and services, the negative effects of this paradox can be mitigated. In the last, the paradox of thrift challenges the traditional notion that saving is always beneficial. While individual financial prudence is necessary, widespread excessive saving can lead to economic stagnation. Understanding this paradox helps policymakers, businesses, and individuals strike the right balance between caution and contribution, ensuring both personal and economic well-being. 7. Stability-instability paradox. The stability-instability paradox is a concept that highlights a counterintuitive phenomenon in security and conflict dynamics. It suggests that while overall stability might reduce the likelihood of large-scale conflicts, it can simultaneously increase the probability of smaller, localized conflicts. The paradox is often applied in geopolitical and military contexts, particularly in nuclear deterrence and international relations. Consider a world where two major powers possess nuclear weapons, creating a balance of power through mutually assured destruction, MAD. Because both nations understand that a direct conflict could lead to catastrophic consequences, they avoid full-scale war. However, this overarching stability does not eliminate conflict altogether. Instead, it shifts the nature of hostilities to smaller, indirect confrontations, such as proxy wars, cyber attacks, or regional skirmishes. This is evident during the Cold War, where the United States and the Soviet Union avoided direct military confrontation but engaged in numerous indirect conflicts, such as the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Soviet-Afghan War. The paradox extends beyond military strategy to broader security policies. For instance, stringent law enforcement in a country might deter large-scale criminal activities or terrorist attacks, but it may push criminal organizations to adapt, leading to decentralized and unpredictable acts of violence. Similarly, strict financial regulations may prevent major economic crises, but could also encourage financial institutions to find loopholes, potentially leading to localized but frequent financial disruptions. From a psychological perspective, the paradox highlights how perceived security influences risk-taking behavior. When individuals feel extremely secure, they may become more complacent or willing to engage in higher-risk activities. This can be seen in economic markets, where prolonged stability can lead to overconfidence, excessive speculation, and eventually economic downturns, as witnessed in the 2008 financial crisis. This paradox also plays a role in technology and cybersecurity. As digital security systems become more sophisticated, attackers shift to more unconventional and unpredictable methods, such as social engineering, ransomware, or supply chain attacks. The very presence of strong security measures can, in some cases, lead to an arms race between defenders and attackers, increasing the overall frequency of breaches despite advancements in protection. Understanding the stability-instability paradox is crucial for policymakers, military strategists, economists, and security experts. While stability is desirable, it does not guarantee peace or absolute safety. Instead, it often shifts the nature of threats and conflicts, requiring continuous adaptation and vigilance. Striking the right balance between stability and flexibility is essential to managing risks effectively in an interconnected world. In the last, the stability-instability paradox reminds us that security and conflict exist in a delicate balance. While overarching stability reduces the risk of catastrophic events, it often fosters a landscape where smaller, more frequent disruptions occur. Recognizing this paradox allows for more nuanced strategies in diplomacy, defense, and risk management, ensuring that stability does not lead to complacency, but rather to proactive and adaptive approaches to maintaining peace and security. 8. Hedonism paradox. The hedonism paradox is a thought-provoking concept that explores the contradiction between the pursuit of happiness and the ability to attain it. It suggests that the more one actively seeks pleasure and happiness, the more elusive they become. This paradox has been studied in philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience, highlighting how the direct pursuit of joy often leads to dissatisfaction or even unhappiness. Consider an individual who dedicates their life to seeking pleasure, whether through material wealth, entertainment, or indulgent experiences. At first, these pursuits may bring joy, but over time, they tend to lose their impact due to a psychological phenomenon known as the hedonic treadmill. This concept explains that people quickly adapt to pleasurable experiences, making them less satisfying over time and compelling them to seek even greater forms of pleasure to achieve the same level of happiness. For example, someone who enjoys luxury vacations may find that each trip becomes less exciting, requiring more extravagant experiences to maintain the same level of joy. This paradox can be observed in modern consumer culture, where people chase happiness through material goods, social status, or digital validation. Studies have shown that while short-term pleasure can be derived from such pursuits, long-term fulfillment often remains out of reach. The constant search for happiness through external means creates a cycle of temporary highs, followed by inevitable dissatisfaction. Psychologists argue that the pressure to be happy at all times can actually lead to anxiety and stress, making genuine happiness more difficult to attain. Another dimension of the hedonism paradox is found in neuroscience. Research suggests that the brain's reward system, which releases dopamine in response to pleasurable activities, can become desensitized with excessive stimulation. This is evident in addiction studies, where individuals who repeatedly engage in high-reward activities, such as gambling or substance use, require increasingly intense experiences to achieve the same pleasure. Over time, this can lead to a diminished ability to feel joy from ordinary everyday experiences. Philosophers have long debated the nature of happiness and fulfillment. Aristotle, for instance, distinguished between hedonic pleasure, short-term gratification, and eudaimonia, a deeper, more meaningful form of happiness derived from purpose and virtue. Modern research supports this idea, suggesting that individuals who engage in meaningful activities, such as helping others, developing skills, or fostering deep relationships, tend to experience more sustained happiness than those who solely chase pleasurable experiences. The hedonism paradox also has implications for mental health. The relentless pursuit of pleasure can contribute to feelings of emptiness, as individuals who expect constant happiness may struggle to cope with inevitable moments of sadness or hardship. In contrast, those who accept a balance of positive and negative experiences tend to have a more resilient and satisfying emotional life. Practices like mindfulness, gratitude, and acceptance have been shown to enhance overall well-being by shifting the focus from seeking happiness to appreciating present moments. In the last, the hedonism paradox teaches us that happiness is often best achieved when it is not pursued directly. Rather than constantly chasing external sources of pleasure, cultivating a balanced life with meaningful experiences, relationships, and self-growth leads to deeper and more lasting fulfillment. By understanding this paradox, individuals can shift their focus from temporary pleasure to more sustainable sources of happiness, ultimately leading to a richer and more satisfying life. 9. Sorite's paradox. The Sorite's paradox, also known as the paradox of the heap, is a philosophical problem that challenges our understanding of vague concepts and gradual change. It arises when small, seemingly insignificant changes lead to an unclear boundary between one state and another. The paradox is most commonly illustrated through the example of a heap of sand. If a heap of sand has thousands of grains and we remove one grain at a time, at what exact point does it cease to be a heap? Conversely, if we start with a single grain and keep adding more, when does it officially become a heap? This paradox highlights a fundamental issue with how we define and categorize concepts that lack precise boundaries. Many real-world phenomena, such as aging, wealth, and baldness, exhibit similar vagueness. For example, at what exact moment does a person transition from being young to old? When does a person become wealthy? These questions do not have definitive answers, which makes them subject to interpretation and debate. Philosophers and logicians have grappled with the Sorite's paradox for centuries, leading to various proposed solutions. One approach is known as epistemicism, which argues that there is a sharp but unknown boundary in every vague concept. According to this view, there is a specific grain of sand that separates a heap from a non-heap, but we simply cannot determine it due to our limited knowledge. Another perspective comes from fuzzy logic, which suggests that concepts like heap or bald exist on a spectrum rather than as binary states. In this framework, a heap does not suddenly disappear, but instead gradually loses its heap-like quality as grains are removed. This approach aligns with how humans naturally think about vague concepts, allowing for degrees of truth rather than absolute distinctions. The Sorite's paradox has profound implications beyond philosophy. In law, ethics, and social policies, many decisions depend on defining vague thresholds. For instance, tax brackets, voting ages, and legal drinking ages require setting arbitrary but necessary cutoffs, even though no single point perfectly distinguishes one category from another. The same issue applies in medical diagnoses. When does someone shift from being healthy to sick? In psychology, the paradox is relevant to the study of perception and cognition. Our brains tend to categorize information even when clear boundaries do not exist. This can lead to cognitive biases, where people perceive abrupt changes in situations that are actually gradual. Understanding the Sorite's paradox helps reveal the limitations of human reasoning and the challenges of making precise distinctions in an imprecise world. In the last, the Sorite's paradox reminds us that many aspects of life exist in a continuum rather than in clear-cut categories. While we often rely on arbitrary distinctions for practical reasons, recognizing the gradual nature of change can lead to a more nuanced understanding of the world. Whether in philosophy, science, or everyday life, this paradox challenges us to think critically about the way we define and interpret vague concepts. 10. Ship of Theseus. The Ship of Theseus is a classic philosophical thought experiment that explores the nature of identity and change over time. The paradox is named after the mythical Greek hero Theseus, whose ship was preserved in a harbor as a historical relic. Over the years, as wooden planks decayed, they were replaced one by one with new planks, until eventually none of the original material remained. This leads to a fundamental question. Is the fully restored ship still the same ship of Theseus, or has it become something entirely different? This paradox challenges our understanding of identity and persistence. If the ship retains its identity, despite the replacement of its parts, then identity must be based on continuity of form rather than physical composition. However, an alternative scenario complicates this idea. If someone were to collect all the original planks and reconstruct the ship elsewhere, which version would be the true ship of Theseus? The paradox forces us to confront the idea that identity might not be a fixed attribute, but rather something that depends on perspective and interpretation. The ship of Theseus is deeply relevant beyond philosophy. In the field of biology, human bodies undergo continuous cellular regeneration, with nearly all cells being replaced over time. Does this mean a person is no longer the same individual they were years ago? Similarly, in technology and engineering, objects such as cars, buildings, and computers are frequently repaired and upgraded. At what point do they cease to be their original versions? In the realm of personal identity, the paradox raises profound questions about human consciousness and selfhood. People evolve mentally and emotionally over time, shaped by experiences and changing beliefs. Does this mean that a person who undergoes a drastic transformation in personality or worldview is no longer the same person? The thought experiment resonates with discussions on personal growth, memory, and the continuity of self. Various philosophical perspectives attempt to resolve the ship of Theseus paradox. Some argue for the principle of mereological essentialism, which holds that an object is defined by its specific parts. Once all original components are replaced, it ceases to be the same entity. Others support the idea of psychological continuity, emphasizing that identity is preserved through an unbroken chain of existence rather than physical material. The paradox has also been explored in modern science fiction and culture. Stories involving teleportation, artificial intelligence, and cloning frequently echo the dilemma of whether a being remains the same if reconstructed from different parts or data. It also influences ethical discussions in medicine, such as organ transplants and prosthetic enhancements, where individuals retain their sense of self despite significant physical alterations. In the last, the ship of Theseus reminds us that identity is a complex and fluid concept, shaped by both tangible and intangible elements. Whether applied to objects, organisms, or personal identity, the paradox challenges us to rethink the meaning of continuity, change, and what it truly means to remain the same over time. 11. Catch-22. The term catch-22 originates from Joseph Heller's 1961 novel of the same name and has since become a widely recognized paradox, describing situations where individuals are trapped by contradictory rules or conditions, making it impossible to escape or resolve the issue. In Heller's novel, the paradox revolves around the plight of military pilots during World War II who wished to be excused from combat duty due to insanity. However, the military regulation, Catch-22, states that if a pilot requests to be removed from combat out of fear for their life, it proves they are sane because only a rational person would try to avoid dangerous missions. Conversely, if they do not request exemption, they may continue flying dangerous missions, possibly leading to their demise. Either way, the individual is caught in a loop with no way out. Beyond literature, Catch-22 has found relevance in many real-world scenarios, particularly in bureaucratic, legal, and social systems. One common example is the job market, where companies require applicants to have work experience before being hired. Yet without a job, gaining that experience is impossible. Similarly, in finance, banks often refuse loans to individuals who need them the most, citing a lack of credit history or financial stability. Yet, without the loan, improving one's financial standing is extremely difficult. These situations highlight the frustrating nature of catch-22 scenarios, where rules contradict themselves and create barriers to progress. In legal systems, someone may need proper identification to apply for a passport, but in some cases, the passport is required to obtain that identification. In healthcare, patients may require treatment to function well enough to apply for insurance, but they cannot receive treatment without insurance coverage. These cyclical dilemmas highlight how institutions sometimes create obstacles that seem impossible to navigate. Similarly, students are often told to think outside the box, but are simultaneously graded on adherence to structured guidelines, discouraging true innovation. These contradictions reinforce the idea that many rules in life create unsolvable loops, leaving people stuck between conflicting conditions. Psychologically, catch-22 situations can lead to frustration, helplessness, and anxiety. When faced with a situation where all available options lead to failure or difficulty, individuals may experience decision paralysis, an overwhelming feeling that no matter what they choose, the outcome will not be favorable. This frustration is particularly evident in systems with excessive red tape, where individuals must navigate layers of contradictory policies before making progress. Despite its frustrating nature, catch-22 can also be seen as a challenge to creativity and resilience. People often find unconventional ways to navigate these paradoxes, either by working around rules, exploiting loopholes, or redefining their goals. For example, entrepreneurs who lack formal experience might build their portfolios through freelance work or internships, sidestepping the conventional employment paradox. Similarly, individuals who struggle with social anxiety may gradually expose themselves to social interactions, slowly building confidence over time despite the initial contradiction. In the last, the catch-22 paradox serves as a reminder that life is often governed by contradictory and seemingly unfair rules. Whether in bureaucracies, job markets, legal systems, or personal growth, these paradoxes can create barriers to success. However, by recognizing these loops and developing creative strategies to navigate them, individuals can often find ways to break free from their constraints. The lesson of catch-22 is not only in acknowledging the paradox, but in learning how to work around it even when the system seems rigged against you. 12. Grand Hotel Paradox. Imagine walking into a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, all of which are occupied. You might assume there's no room for another guest, but in the strange world of infinity, that's not necessarily true. This is the essence of the Grand Hotel Paradox, a thought experiment proposed by the German mathematician David Hilbert. It challenges our understanding of infinity and how it behaves in counterintuitive ways. Let's say a traveler arrives at the Grand Hotel, which is already full. In a normal hotel, the traveler would be turned away. But since this is an infinite hotel, the manager comes up with a clever solution. Each guest moves from their current room to the next one. Room 1 moves to room 2, room 2 moves to room 3, and so on. This shift leaves room 1 vacant, allowing the new guest to check in. Despite the hotel being full, it has still made space for an additional occupant. This seemingly impossible situation illustrates the peculiar nature of infinite sets. Now, what if an infinite number of travelers arrive at the hotel, Once again, the manager has a trick. Each guest moves to the room number that is twice their current room number. Room 1 moves to room 2. Room 2 moves to room 4. Room 3 moves to room 5, 6, etc. This reorganization leaves all odd-numbered rooms vacant, allowing an infinite number of new guests to check in, even though the hotel was supposedly full before. This paradox highlights a crucial concept in mathematics. Infinity is not a fixed, finite quantity, but rather a fluid and paradoxical concept. It demonstrates that an infinite set can be rearranged to accommodate even more elements without technically increasing its size. This is not how finite numbers behave, making the Grand Hotel paradox a fascinating insight into the nature of infinity. Real-world implications of this paradox can be seen in areas like computing, where infinite loops play a role in algorithms, or in physics, where concepts of infinity are explored in theories about the universe. It also challenges our intuition about space, limits, and what it means for something to be full. In the last, the Grand Hotel paradox teaches us that infinity follows its own set of rules, often defying our expectations. While in everyday life, space and numbers are finite, the paradox invites us to think beyond conventional limits and explore the endless possibilities that mathematics and logic present. 13. Schrödinger's cat. Imagine you have a cat inside a sealed box. Along with the cat, there's a small radioactive substance, a Geiger counter, a vial of poison, and a hammer. The radioactive substance has a 50% chance of decaying within an hour. If it decays, the Geiger counter detects it, triggering the hammer to break the vial of poison, which kills the cat. If it doesn't decay, the cat remains alive. Since the box is sealed, there is no way to know whether the cat is dead or alive until we open it. Until that moment, the cat is considered to be in a superposition of both states, both alive and dead at the same time. This is Schrödinger's cat, a famous thought experiment proposed by Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger in 1935 to illustrate the weirdness of quantum mechanics. In classical physics, an object is either in one state or another. Something either happens or it doesn't. But in quantum mechanics, particles can exist in multiple states at once, known as superposition, until observed. At the heart of this paradox is the question of when quantum probabilities collapse into a definite outcome. Does observation itself determine reality? Before opening the box, the cat exists in a limbo state of being both dead and alive. But the moment an observer checks, the superposition collapses into one definite reality, either a living cat or a dead one. This paradox has profound implications in quantum physics, particularly in the Copenhagen interpretation, which suggests that a system remains in superposition until it is measured. However, other interpretations, like the many worlds interpretation, suggest that both realities exist simultaneously in separate parallel universes, one where the cat is alive and another where it is dead. The paradox has been metaphorically applied to many real-world scenarios. For instance, in decision-making, we often exist in multiple possibilities until we make a choice, collapsing potential futures into one outcome. In artificial intelligence and computing, quantum computers leverage the idea of superposition to perform calculations at incredible speeds, existing in multiple states simultaneously. Despite being a thought experiment, Schrödinger's cat captures one of the most perplexing aspects of quantum mechanics. Reality may not be as definite as we perceive it to be, It challenges our understanding of existence, observation, and the very nature of reality itself. In the last, this paradox reminds us that at the quantum level, the universe doesn't follow the rules of classical physics, and what we see as reality may depend entirely on observation. Whether in physics, philosophy, or real-world dilemmas, Schrödinger's cat remains a powerful symbol of uncertainty and the mysteries that science continues to explore. 14. Fermi Paradox. Picture this looking up at the night sky, filled with billions of stars, each potentially hosting planets similar to Earth. Given the sheer number of galaxies, stars, and potentially habitable planets in the universe, logic suggests that intelligent extraterrestrial civilizations should be common. And yet, despite decades of searching, we have found no definitive evidence of alien life. This contradiction between the high probability of extraterrestrial civilizations and the complete lack of evidence for them is known as the Fermi Paradox, named after the physicist Enrico Fermi, who famously asked, "Where is everybody?" There are many possible explanations for the paradox. One possibility is that intelligent life is extremely rare. While microbial life may be abundant, complex life may require such precise conditions that it rarely, if ever, emerges. Another explanation is the idea of the Great Filter, a theoretical barrier that prevents civilizations from advancing to a point where they can communicate or explore the universe. This filter could be behind us, meaning life rarely evolves to intelligence, or ahead of us, implying that advanced civilizations inevitably self-destruct before they can colonize the stars. Another perspective is that advanced civilizations do exist, but deliberately avoid us. This could be due to the zoo hypothesis, which suggests that alien civilizations observe us from afar, much like humans observe animals in a nature reserve, choosing not to interfere. Alternatively, the dark forest hypothesis posits that the universe is a hostile place where civilizations remain silent to avoid drawing attention from potential threats. Some theories suggest technological limitations may prevent communication. Perhaps alien civilizations use communication methods we do not yet understand, or the vast distances between stars make interstellar travel impractical, limiting contact. Additionally, the time scale of civilizations might not align. Advanced species may have existed millions of years before or after us, missing the opportunity for interaction. Despite the mystery, the Fermi Paradox continues to fuel scientific exploration. Projects like the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, SETI, scan the skies for signals, and space missions aim to discover habitable exoplanets where life might exist. Advances in astronomy, artificial intelligence, and space exploration bring us closer to answering the question of whether we are alone in the universe. In the last, the Fermi Paradox forces us to confront the possibility that intelligent life is rare, self-destructive, or simply beyond our reach. It is a humbling reminder of both the vastness of the cosmos and the limitations of our understanding. Until we find concrete evidence, the question remains open, leaving us to wonder, if extraterrestrial life is out there, why haven't we found it yet? 15. Unexpected hanging paradox. A judge informs a prisoner that they will be hanged at noon on a weekday in the following week. But the execution will come as a surprise. The prisoner, a logical thinker, tries to deduce when the execution will occur. They reason that if they make it to Friday without being hanged, then they must be executed on Friday, but that wouldn't be a surprise. So, Friday is eliminated. Then, by the same logic, if they reach Thursday, it must happen then, which also wouldn't be a surprise. The prisoner continues eliminating days until they conclude that the hanging cannot happen at all. Yet, to their shock, the execution takes place on a seemingly random day, catching them completely off guard. This is the essence of the unexpected hanging paradox, a famous logical paradox that challenges our understanding of predictability, reasoning, and self-referential statements. It highlights the contradiction that arises when someone tries to logically determine an event that is defined as unpredictable. The paradox has been analyzed from multiple perspectives. Some interpretations suggest that the prisoner's reasoning is flawed because they assume their deduction process itself is infallible. Others argue that the judge's statement creates a self-referential loop. The moment the prisoner believes they have solved the puzzle, the original premise that the hanging will be unexpected changes, leading to a contradiction. The unexpected hanging paradox has real-world implications beyond hypothetical scenarios. In game theory, psychology, and even legal philosophy, the paradox challenges how we approach self-referential problems. It's a demonstration of how assumptions about knowledge, logic, and unpredictability can lead to contradictions. Some have linked this paradox to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics, where certain outcomes cannot be precisely determined because the act of measurement itself influences the system. Others compare it to Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which show that certain logical systems contain statements that cannot be proven or disproven within the system itself. In the last, the unexpected hanging paradox teaches us a fundamental lesson. Logic and human reasoning, while powerful, have limits when confronted with self-referential or paradoxical statements. Sometimes, the very act of trying to predict an outcome changes the conditions, ensuring that the surprise remains intact. And so, the prisoner's fate, seemingly impossible, unfolds exactly as the judge had predicted, leaving us to wonder, can we ever truly outthink the unexpected? 16. Barber Paradox. Imagine a small town where a single barber is known for one peculiar rule. He shaves all and only those men who do not shave themselves. At first glance, this rule seems simple and logical. But then a strange question arises. Who shaves the barber? If the barber shaves himself, then according to his own rule, he must not shave himself. But if he does not shave himself, then he must be shaved by the barber, which is himself. This leads to a logical contradiction where neither possibility can be true without violating the original rule. This is the barber paradox, formulated by the mathematician Bertrand Russell, and it demonstrates a fundamental problem in self-referential logic. At its core, the paradox exposes the limitations of set theory and logic when dealing with self-referential statements. It is closely related to Russell's paradox, which questions whether a set that contains all sets that do not contain themselves can logically exist. The barber paradox is essentially a more accessible version of this deeper mathematical issue, using a simple everyday scenario to highlight an inconsistency in defining membership within a group. One way to resolve the paradox is to conclude that such a barber cannot logically exist. The rule that defines the barber creates an impossible situation, meaning that no real-world barber could follow such a rule consistently. In formal logic and mathematics, This paradox demonstrates the necessity of refining definitions and avoiding self-referential loops that create contradictions. Beyond mathematics, the Barber paradox has implications in philosophy and computer science. It relates to problems in self-reference, such as the liar paradox, where a statement like, "This sentence is false," creates an unresolvable contradiction. In computing, similar logical loops can lead to problems in programming and artificial intelligence, where self-referential commands can create infinite loops or logical inconsistencies. In the last, the Barber paradox serves as a fascinating example of how simple rules can lead to profound logical dilemmas. It challenges our understanding of set membership, self-reference, and the limits of logical consistency. Like many great paradoxes, it reminds us that logic, while powerful, is not always free from contradictions. Sometimes the simplest questions can lead to the most puzzling answers, leaving us to wonder, can a rule truly exist if following it makes it impossible to obey? 17. Bootstrap paradox. Imagine a famous author receives a mysterious book from an unknown source. The book is full of extraordinary knowledge, so the author decides to publish it under their name. Years later, a young historian stumbles upon the book and is so inspired that they travel back in time and hand the book to the very same author, ensuring its existence in the past. Now the question arises, who actually wrote the book in the first place? This is the essence of the bootstrap paradox, a mind-bending concept in time travel and causality. It occurs when an object, piece of information, or even a person is trapped in an infinite loop of existence without an identifiable point of origin. The paradox suggests that something can exist without ever being created, defying conventional logic and the principles of causality. The term bootstrap comes from the phrase pulling oneself up by their bootstraps, implying something is self-created without an initial source. This paradox frequently appears in science fiction and philosophical discussions, raising profound questions about time loops, free will, and the nature of reality. One of the most famous examples of the bootstrap paradox is the case of Beethoven's symphonies. Imagine a time traveler from the future brings Beethoven's sheet music to the past before Beethoven ever wrote them. He then learns and publishes these works, believing them to be his own creations. The question remains, where did the symphonies originally come from? No one actually composed them. They exist in a never-ending cycle. In physics, the bootstrap paradox raises critical questions about time travel's feasibility. If time travel to the past were possible, could information or objects sustain themselves in an infinite loop, violating the principle of causality? Some theories in quantum mechanics suggest that information cannot be destroyed, leading to speculation that time loops like these might exist under specific conditions. The paradox also has implications for philosophy, particularly in discussions about determinism and free will. If events in the past are predestined by a future influence, then do individuals have any true agency over their actions? Or is reality structured in a way where certain events must happen, regardless of choice? Scientists and theorists have attempted to resolve the bootstrap paradox, using various interpretations of time travel. One possible explanation involves the many worlds interpretation, which suggests that any attempt to send information back in time would create a new timeline, preventing true paradoxes from occurring. Another approach argues that such time loops are simply impossible due to the violation of entropy and the laws of thermodynamics. Despite these debates, the bootstrap paradox remains one of the most intriguing and unsettling paradoxes in theoretical physics and philosophy. It forces us to question the very nature of existence, time, and causality. In the last, whether through literature, music, or knowledge, the paradox leaves us with an unsettling realization. Sometimes, things may simply exist without an origin, caught in an eternal loop of causality, forever rewriting the past and the future. 18. Sword and shield paradox. Imagine walking through an ancient marketplace where a skilled blacksmith proudly showcases two of his finest creations, an unbreakable shield and a spear that can pierce through anything. A curious passerby approaches and asks the blacksmith, "What happens if I strike your unbreakable shield with your all-piercing spear?" The blacksmith falls silent, unable to answer, for the contradiction in his claims is exposed. This is the essence of the sword and shield paradox, also known as the irresistible force paradox. Originating from ancient Chinese philosophy, this paradox is rooted in the concept of absolute contradictions. The earliest known reference comes from a story in the philosophical text Han Feizi, written during the Warring States period, 475 to 221 BCE. In the story, a merchant boasts of selling a spear so sharp it can pierce any armor and a shield so strong it can withstand any attack. When challenged to test one against the other, he finds himself caught in his own contradiction. At its core, the paradox raises the question, can an unstoppable force and an immovable object coexist? If one claim is true, the other must be false, leading to an inherent logical inconsistency. This contradiction is not just a rhetorical puzzle, but has deep implications in philosophy, logic, and even physics. In modern science, the sword and shield paradox finds an analogy in the idea of absolute physical limits. In physics, an unstoppable force could represent infinite energy, while an immovable object could symbolize infinite mass. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, nothing with mass can reach the speed of light, and no object with infinite mass can exist. Thus, the paradox suggests that such absolute extremes are inherently impossible within the known laws of physics. Philosophically, this paradox is often used to explore the limitations of omnipotence. For instance, in theological debates, it is sometimes framed as, can an all-powerful being create a stone so heavy that even they cannot lift it? If the answer is yes, then the being is not all-powerful because they cannot lift the stone. If the answer is no, they are not all-powerful because they cannot create such a stone. This paradox challenges our understanding of absolute power and logical consistency. The paradox also finds relevance in practical applications, such as cybersecurity, where developers create unbreakable encryption systems while hackers develop increasingly sophisticated methods to crack them. Similarly, in military technology, the development of advanced armor is continually met with the invention of more powerful weapons, creating an ongoing cycle of innovation and counter-innovation. While the paradox may seem unsolvable, its value lies in the thought-provoking discussions it inspires. It challenges us to recognize the limitations of absolute claims and to approach extreme assertions with skepticism. In the last, the sword and shield paradox reminds us that true understanding often lies not in resolving contradictions, but in acknowledging the complexities they reveal. 19. Pinocchio paradox. Imagine a moment where Pinocchio, the wooden puppet who dreams of becoming a real boy, looks you in the eye and says, "My nose will grow now." As we all know, Pinocchio's nose only grows when he tells a lie. But what happens in this case? If his nose grows, it means he was telling the truth. But that contradicts the rule that it only grows when he lies. However, if his nose does not grow, then he must have been lying, which means it should grow. This paradox creates an endless loop of contradiction, a logical impossibility that has intrigued philosophers and logicians for years. The Pinocchio paradox is a self-referential paradox, meaning that the statement refers to itself in a way that makes it impossible to determine its truth value. It was first proposed by philosopher Peter Eldridge Smith in 2001 as a variation of the classic liar paradox, which is expressed as, "This statement is false. If the statement is true, then it must be false. But if it is false, then it must be true." This endless contradiction is at the heart of the Pinocchio paradox. What makes the Pinocchio paradox especially intriguing is its connection to language, logic, and truth. It forces us to consider the nature of self-reference and how statements can loop back onto themselves, creating logical impossibilities. Philosophers and logicians have explored similar paradoxes throughout history, such as Russell's paradox in set theory, which questions whether a set that contains all sets also contains itself, leading to an irresolvable contradiction. A deeper exploration of the paradox brings up significant discussions in epistemology, the study of knowledge and truth. If we take Pinocchio's statement literally and apply the rules of his world, we end up in an endless contradiction that defies simple resolution. It also raises questions about the nature of truth itself. Can there be statements that are neither true nor false, existing in a state of paradoxical suspension? The paradox has also found its way into discussions of artificial intelligence and programming logics. In computing, self-referential statements can create infinite loops that crash systems. The famous halting problem in computer science, discovered by Alan Turing, demonstrates that certain algorithms cannot determine whether a program will finish running or continue indefinitely. Similarly, Pinocchio's paradox presents a scenario where logic reaches a deadlock, unable to resolve itself. Beyond philosophy and computing, the paradox even has implications for ethical debates. It questions how we define truth in a world where self-referential contradictions exist. It forces us to ask, is every statement verifiable? And what does it mean for something to be both true and false simultaneously? In the last, the Pinocchio paradox is not just a quirky thought experiment. It is a profound exploration of logic, truth, and the limitations of language. It challenges us to think beyond binary definitions of true and false, and to accept that some statements may exist in a realm where conventional logic breaks down. Whether in philosophy, computer science, or everyday reasoning, it reminds us that reality is often more complex than simple yes or no answers. 20. Simpson's paradox. Imagine a scenario where a new medical treatment is tested on two different groups of patients. At first glance, the data suggests that the treatment is more effective than the existing one. However, when the same data is broken down by age groups, it suddenly appears that the old treatment is actually better. This contradictory result is an example of Simpson's paradox, a statistical phenomenon where a trend appearing in several groups of data reverses when the groups are combined. Simpson's paradox was first described by statistician Edward H. Simpson in 1951, though similar observations had been noted as early as the 19th century. The paradox arises in situations where the relationships between variables change depending on how data is grouped or aggregated. This effect is particularly common in fields like medical research, social sciences, and economics, where large data sets often mask underlying patterns. One of the most famous real-world examples of Simpson's paradox occurred in the 1973 University of California Berkeley admissions study. The data showed that men were admitted at a higher rate than women, suggesting gender bias. However, when broken down by individual departments, it was revealed that women were applying to more competitive programs with lower acceptance rates, while men were applying to less competitive programs. The overall trend of gender bias disappeared when analyzed department by department, demonstrating how misleading aggregated data can be. The paradox also appears in sports statistics. Suppose a baseball player has a higher batting average than another player in 2 separate seasons. Yet when the data from both seasons is combined, the second player has the higher average. This can happen when the number of opportunities in each season varies, skewing the overall results. Such statistical illusions are critical in decision-making processes, as misinterpretation can lead to incorrect conclusions. In the world of public health, Simpson's paradox can influence policy decisions. For example, a new drug may appear to be more effective overall, but when broken down by demographic groups such as age, gender, or ethnicity, it may actually be less effective in key populations. This highlights the importance of looking beyond simple averages and analyzing data in a more detailed manner. Mathematically, Simpson's paradox occurs due to confounding variables, hidden factors that influence both the independent and dependent variables. When these variables are accounted for, the apparent contradiction disappears. Statisticians use techniques like stratification and regression analysis to correct for these effects, ensuring that conclusions drawn from data are accurate and meaningful. Understanding Simpson's paradox is essential for making informed decisions in science, business, and everyday life. It teaches us that data should never be taken at face value and that deeper analysis is necessary to uncover the true relationships within complex data sets. The paradox reminds us that statistics, while powerful, must be interpreted with care to avoid misleading conclusions. In the last, Simpson's paradox is a striking example of how data can be deceptive when improperly analyzed. It challenges our assumptions about statistics and reinforces the need for careful, context-aware analysis. Whether in scientific research, business strategy, or public policy, recognizing this paradox can help us avoid flawed reasoning and make better, more informed decisions. 21. Dichotomy, paradox. Imagine you are running a race. To reach the finish line, you must first cover half the distance. But before reaching that halfway point, you must first get halfway to that. And before that, halfway again. This pattern continues infinitely, making it seem like you will never actually reach your goal. This is the dichotomy paradox, first proposed by the ancient Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea to challenge our understanding of motion and infinity. Zeno's paradoxes, including the dichotomy paradox, were designed to question the very nature of space and time. In this case, the paradox suggests that in order to travel any finite distance, one must complete an infinite number of smaller steps. Since completing an infinite number of tasks seems impossible, it appears that motion itself should not be possible. Yet, in reality, we move all the time. How can we resolve this contradiction? One way to think about this paradox is mathematically. The total distance traveled can be expressed as a sum of fractions: 1/2 plus 1/4 plus 1/8 plus 1/16, and so on. While this may seem like an endless process, modern mathematics shows that this sum converges to a finite number. The idea of limits in calculus, developed centuries after Zeno's time by mathematicians like Newton and Leibniz, provides a logical explanation for how an infinite series can sum to a finite result, allowing motion to occur as we perceive it. Another perspective comes from physics. In reality, time and space are not infinitely divisible. The smallest measurable unit of space, known as the Planck length, and the smallest unit of time, the Planck time, suggest that there is a fundamental limit beyond which further division is meaningless. This implies that nature itself avoids the paradox by setting a lower bound on the smallest possible steps in motion. Zeno's dichotomy paradox continues to be an important thought experiment in philosophy, mathematics, and physics. It challenges our intuitions about the world and has led to deeper inquiries into the nature of infinity and continuity. By considering the paradox and its resolution, we gain a greater appreciation for the mathematical principles that explain motion, as well as the limitations of human perception in understanding the universe. In the last, the dichotomy paradox serves as a reminder that what seems impossible at first glance may simply be a matter of perspective. Through logical reasoning and scientific discovery, we can unravel such paradoxes and gain a deeper understanding of the fundamental nature of reality. 22. Grandfather paradox. Imagine you invent a time machine and decide to travel back in time to meet your grandfather before he ever had children. Now, let's say you prevent him from meeting your grandmother, or in an extreme scenario, you directly cause his demise. If your grandfather never has children, that means your parent is never born, and in turn, you are never born. But if you were never born, how could you have traveled back in time in the first place? This is the essence of the grandfather paradox, a thought experiment that highlights the contradictions of time travel. This paradox was first widely discussed in the early 20th century and has since become a major topic in philosophy, physics, and science fiction. It challenges the idea of consistency in a universe where time travel to the past is possible. If actions in the past can alter the future in ways that prevent the traveler from ever making the trip, does that mean time travel is impossible? Or does the universe find a way to resolve the contradiction? One possible resolution comes in the form of the Novikov self-consistency principle, which suggests that time travel might be possible, but events must be consistent with history. This means that if you traveled back in time, you could never change anything in a way that prevents your own time travel from occurring. Perhaps every action you take in the past was already part of history, meaning you were always meant to go back in time, and nothing you do can change that. Another theory involves parallel universes or branching timelines. Some physicists suggest that when a traveler alters the past, they create a new timeline rather than changing the original one. In this scenario, Preventing your grandfather from having children does not erase your existence, but instead places you in a newly created reality where you were never born, while your original reality remains unchanged. The grandfather paradox remains an unsolved question in physics, primarily because we have no evidence that time travel to the past is possible. However, it continues to inspire debates in theoretical physics, from discussions on quantum mechanics to relativity and multiverse theories. Whether or not time travel is achievable, the paradox serves as a fascinating glimpse into the complexities of causality and free will. In the last, the grandfather paradox challenges our understanding of time and forces us to consider whether the past is truly set in stone or if alternate realities might offer a loophole to its contradictions. Whether through self-consistency, branching timelines, or unknown physics yet to be discovered, this paradox remains one of the most intriguing puzzles of time travel. 23. Grain of millet paradox. Picture yourself standing in a quiet room when someone drops a single grain of millet onto the floor. You listen carefully, but you hear nothing. Then another grain is dropped, and still there is no sound. However, if someone were to drop an entire sack of millet onto the floor, you would undoubtedly hear the noise. This is the heart of the grain of millet paradox, a philosophical puzzle that challenges our perception of reality and sensory thresholds. The paradox originates from the teachings of the ancient Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea, who was known for his paradoxes concerning motion, division, and perception. The grain of millet paradox specifically questions the nature of perception and our ability to detect changes in the world around us. If one grain makes no sound, but many grains do, at what point does sound emerge? Is it the result of a single additional grain, or is it only significant in large numbers? This thought experiment raises an important issue in philosophy and psychology: the problem of the threshold. Many aspects of our perception work in gradual increments. A single candle in a bright room does not make a noticeable difference, but 100 candles certainly do. Likewise, one extra degree of temperature may go unnoticed, but a significant shift in temperature becomes undeniable. This concept is deeply tied to the study of sensory perception and just noticeable differences, a field explored by psychologists such as Ernst Weber and Gustav Fechner. The paradox also plays into the broader philosophical question of the Sorit's problem, which deals with vague predicates. If one grain of millet makes no sound, and adding one more still makes no difference, how do we explain the point at which sound suddenly becomes audible? This relates to broader issues such as the nature of identity, classification, and language. How many grains make a heap? When does a person go from being young to old? When does a gradual change become a significant transformation? Modern science offers some insights into this paradox. In auditory perception, there is a concept called the absolute threshold of hearing, which refers to the quietest sound a person can detect. While a single grain of millet may fall below this threshold, multiple grains collectively create vibrations that exceed it. This means that while we may not hear a single grain, the cumulative effect of many grains is enough to stimulate our auditory system. The grain of millet paradox forces us to confront the limits of our perception and challenges us to define where changes truly begin. It highlights the intricacies of sensory experience, the philosophy of language, and even how we make judgments in daily life. In the last, this paradox reminds us that sometimes the smallest things may not seem significant on their own, but together they shape the very reality we perceive. 24. Olber's paradox. Visualize yourself gazing up at the night sky on a clear evening. You see countless stars scattered across the darkness, yet the sky itself remains largely black. This observation seems natural, but when you stop to think about it, a puzzling question arises. If the universe is infinite and filled with an enormous number of stars, why isn't the night sky completely bright? This is the heart of Olber's paradox, a mystery that puzzled astronomers and philosophers for centuries. The paradox was named after the German astronomer Heinrich Wilhelm Olbers, who popularized it in the early 19th century. The basic premise is simple. If the universe is infinite and static, with stars evenly distributed throughout space, then every line of sight should eventually land on a star. Just as a dense forest appears filled with trees in every direction, an infinite universe filled with stars should result in a sky that is bright everywhere. However, this is not what we observe. The sky remains mostly dark, punctuated by distant points of light. One of the earliest recorded discussions of this paradox dates back to Johannes Kepler in 1610, who suggested that the darkness of the sky might be due to a limited number of stars. However, this explanation was soon challenged as astronomers realized the universe was likely vast, if not infinite. Later, in the 18th century, the idea resurfaced through Edmund Halley and Jean-Philippe de Chaiseau, who recognized that something fundamental was missing in the understanding of the cosmos. Modern science has helped resolve Olber's paradox through key discoveries in cosmology. One crucial factor is the finite age of the universe. The observable universe is about 13.8 billion years old, meaning that we can only see light from objects within that time frame. Stars beyond a certain distance simply haven't had enough time for their light to reach us. In other words, the universe is not infinitely old, so we do not see the accumulated glow of endless stars. Another major explanation comes from the expansion of the universe. The discovery of redshift, the stretching of light waves due to the expansion of space, means that the light from distant galaxies shifts toward lower energy, making it less visible to the human eye. In an infinite static universe, light from distant stars would continuously build up. But in a dynamic and expanding universe, much of that light is stretched beyond the visible spectrum, appearing as infrared or microwave radiation instead. Additionally, the presence of cosmic dust and gas plays a role. These interstellar materials absorb and scatter light, preventing the full brightness of distant stars from reaching us. However, this explanation alone does not fully resolve the paradox, as over vast timescales, absorbed light should eventually be re-emitted. The more fundamental resolution lies in the finite age and expansion of the universe. Interestingly, Olber's paradox is not just a historical curiosity, it was a stepping stone toward modern cosmology. It contributed to the shift away from the idea of a static universe and toward the Big Bang theory, which explains why the sky remains dark despite the presence of countless stars. Today, instead of a bright sky, we observe the cosmic microwave background radiation, a faint glow left over from the early universe, detectable with sensitive instruments. Olber's paradox reminds us that sometimes the simplest questions, like why the sky is dark, can lead to profound discoveries about the nature of reality. In the last, this paradox serves as a gateway to understanding the universe's vastness, its history, and the fundamental laws that shape it. 25. Paradox of the Raven. Picture yourself walking through a vast orchard, filled with trees bearing bright red apples. As you observe the apples, you notice that each one you pick is red, reinforcing your belief that all apples are red. But then imagine someone tells you that by observing a black raven, you're also confirming this belief. At first, this might sound absurd. How can seeing a black raven provide evidence for a statement about apples? Yet, this is precisely the puzzle behind the paradox of the raven. First introduced by the German philosopher and logician Carl Gustav Hempel in the 1940s, this paradox challenges the way we think about logic, confirmation, and the scientific method. It is rooted in the principles of inductive reasoning, the process of drawing general conclusions from specific observations. The paradox arises from what is known as the equivalence principle, which states that logically the statement, "all ravens are black," is the same as "everything that is not black is not a raven." This means that if you find a black raven, it supports the claim that all ravens are black. But strangely, finding a green apple, a blue car, or a white chair also supports this claim, because none of these things are black ravens, and their existence aligns with the rule that everything that is not black is not a raven. This leads to a strange conclusion. Observing anything that isn't a black raven, such as a red apple, somehow provides evidence that all ravens are black. This defies common sense because intuitively we expect evidence for a claim to come from directly examining relevant cases, not unrelated ones. Scientists and philosophers have debated this paradox for decades, attempting to reconcile logical reasoning with human intuition. One way to approach this paradox is through probability. If we already have strong evidence that most ravens are black, seeing another black raven adds little to our confidence. But if we know very little about ravens, then each black raven we observe significantly strengthens our belief. In contrast, seeing a non-black object that is not a raven might technically support the rule, but it does so in a minuscule, almost meaningless way. This idea is tied to Bayesian probability, which helps weigh how new evidence impacts our existing beliefs. Another perspective comes from the practical nature of scientific reasoning. In reality, scientists do not rely on abstract logical equivalences alone. They design experiments that directly test hypotheses, rather than drawing conclusions from unrelated observations. While the paradox reveals a quirk in formal logic, in practice, we intuitively give greater weight to direct observations rather than indirect confirmations. Ultimately, the paradox of the raven is a fascinating thought experiment that forces us to question the nature of evidence and reasoning. It shows that while logic follows strict rules, human intuition and scientific practice often take a different path. In the last, this paradox reminds us that sometimes what seems logically correct may not always align with the way we naturally understand the world. 26. Stockdale Paradox. Envision standing in a dark, confined prison cell, unsure of when or if you will ever be free again. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, yet you refuse to give up hope. You tell yourself that someday you will walk out of this nightmare. However, you also recognize the harsh reality of your situation. This ordeal could last much longer than you expect, and mere optimism alone will not set you free. This balance between unwavering faith and brutal realism is the essence of the Stockdale paradox. The paradox is named after Admiral James Stockdale, a U.S. Navy officer who was held as a prisoner of war for over 7 years during the Vietnam War. During his captivity, Stockdale endured relentless torture, deprivation, and uncertainty. Many of his fellow prisoners held on to blind optimism, believing they would be released by Christmas, then Easter, then the next holiday. But when those days came and went with no rescue, their hope crumbled and despair took hold. Stockdale, however, approached his imprisonment differently. He maintained an unshakable belief that he would eventually make it out alive, but he did not deceive himself about the brutality of his reality. He accepted that his suffering could last years and that he had to mentally prepare for the worst while still believing in the best. The paradox teaches an important lesson about resilience and leadership. Psychologists and business experts often reference the Stockdale paradox in discussions about overcoming adversity, whether in personal struggles, business challenges, or even societal crises. It suggests that people who focus only on optimism without acknowledging reality may be setting themselves up for disappointment and collapse when things don't go as planned. On the other hand, those who dwell only on the harshness of their circumstances may fall into despair and give up entirely. True resilience lies in balancing these two perspectives, having the discipline to confront brutal facts while holding on to deep faith in ultimate success. This paradox is particularly relevant in times of crisis. In business, leaders who acknowledge tough realities while maintaining long-term vision tend to succeed more than those who rely solely on hope or who succumb to pessimism. In mental health, individuals facing difficulties such as grief, failure, or personal setbacks can benefit from the Stockdale paradox by recognizing their struggles without letting them define their future. Studies in psychological resilience suggest that people who adopt this mindset tend to recover from hardships more effectively and emerge stronger. Stockdale's experience reminds us that the way we frame adversity can determine our survival and growth. The paradox does not tell us to abandon hope. It tells us to strengthen it with realism. In the last, this paradox teaches that enduring hardship requires not just optimism, but also the courage to face reality head-on, making it a powerful lesson for anyone navigating life's uncertainties. 27. Card paradox. Imagine holding a simple index card in your hands. On one side, you read a statement that says, "The statement on the other side of this card is true." Curious, you flip the card over only to find another statement. The statement on the other side of this card is false. You pause for a moment, realizing that you've stumbled upon an endless loop. If the first statement is true, then the second must be true as well. But if the second statement is true, then the first must be false. This is the card paradox, a classic example of self-referential contradiction in logic. This paradox falls into a category of liar paradoxes, where statements contradict themselves in a way that defies conventional logic. It was first introduced by Philip Jourdain, a British logician, as a simple way to demonstrate the complexities of self-reference. The problem arises because both statements depend on each other for their truthfulness, yet neither can be consistently classified as true or false. This infinite contradiction is what makes it a paradox. At its core, The card paradox highlights an issue that has intrigued philosophers and logicians for centuries: the problem of self-reference. Statements that reference themselves can create paradoxical loops that make it impossible to determine their truth value. Similar paradoxes exist in language, mathematics, and even computer science, where self-referential programming errors can cause infinite loops that crash systems. One of the most famous paradoxes similar to this is the liar paradox, where a person declares, "I am lying." If the statement is true, then they must be lying, which contradicts the original claim. However, if the statement is false, then they must be telling the truth, creating an endless contradiction. The card paradox works in a similar way, but with the added twist of involving two statements that depend on each other rather than a single self-referential sentence. The implications of the card paradox extend into various fields, particularly formal logic and mathematics. In the early 20th century, mathematician Kurt Gödel developed his famous incompleteness theorems, which showed that in any sufficiently complex mathematical system, there are statements that cannot be proven true or false within the system itself. This was a groundbreaking discovery that revealed the inherent limitations of logic and mathematics. Beyond theoretical discussions, the card paradox has real-world applications in computer science, artificial intelligence, and philosophy. In AI, paradoxes like this challenge how machines interpret truth and handle logical contradictions. If an AI encounters a self-referential statement, how should it respond? This question is crucial in developing more advanced and reliable AI systems. The paradox also invites us to reflect on how we use language in everyday life. We often encounter contradictory statements in politics, media, and even personal conversations. Recognizing these logical inconsistencies can help us become more critical thinkers and avoid falling into misleading arguments. In the last, the card paradox serves as a fascinating glimpse into the strange world of logic and contradiction. It reminds us that not everything can be neatly categorized as true or false, and sometimes the way we frame a question can be just as important as the answer itself. 28. Paradox of enrichment. Visualize a thriving ecosystem where predators and prey exist in a delicate balance. Now imagine that scientists intervene, increasing the availability of food for the prey species, perhaps by introducing more vegetation or supplemental feeding. At first, it seems like a positive change. The prey population booms, providing an even greater food source for the predators. However, instead of leading to long-term stability, something unexpected happens. The entire system collapses. This is the paradox of enrichment, a counterintuitive concept in ecology that suggests increasing resources can sometimes destabilize an ecosystem rather than strengthen it. The paradox was first introduced by the ecologist Rosenzweig, 1971, in his work on predator-prey dynamics. In a stable environment, predator and prey populations regulate each other in a cyclical manner. When prey numbers rise, predator populations increase as well, keeping everything in check. However, when prey abundance is artificially increased, predator numbers grow too quickly. This leads to overconsumption of the prey, eventually depleting their population to the point of collapse. With no food left, the predator population also crashes, resulting in an ecological disaster. This paradox has been observed in real-world ecosystems. For example, In certain controlled fishing environments, increasing fish populations artificially has led to unexpected predator spikes, which in turn caused the fish stocks to decline faster than anticipated. Similarly, in agriculture, excessive fertilization can temporarily boost crop yields, but may ultimately deplete soil nutrients, causing long-term damage to the land's fertility. One way to understand the paradox of enrichment is through mathematical models, such as the Lotka-Volterra equations, which describe predator-prey interactions. These models show that when prey growth is accelerated beyond a certain point, the equilibrium between species is lost, leading to unstable population cycles or complete extinction events. In other words, enriching an ecosystem can push it past its natural limits, making it more vulnerable to sudden crashes. The paradox also has implications for conservation biology. Well-intentioned efforts to boost endangered species populations can sometimes backfire if not carefully managed. For example, introducing too much food to a struggling animal population might initially seem helpful, but could encourage unnatural population spikes that lead to resource depletion. Instead, conservationists must focus on restoring natural balances rather than artificially inflating numbers. Beyond ecology, the paradox of enrichment has been applied metaphorically to other areas, such as economics and social systems. In business, rapid economic growth fueled by excess resources can lead to financial bubbles, which eventually burst when unsustainable expansion collapses under its own weight. Similarly, in human societies, too much abundance, whether in food, entertainment, or luxury, can sometimes lead to diminishing returns or even social instability, as seen in cases of overindulgence and economic disparity. This paradox serves as a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of well-meaning interventions. It reminds us that in nature, balance is often more valuable than abundance. In the last, the paradox of enrichment teaches us that more is not always better. Sometimes, restraint and sustainability are the keys to long-term stability. 29. Service recovery paradox. Imagine you walk into a fancy restaurant, excited for a great meal. You place your order, but something goes wrong. The dish arrives late, and when it finally does, it's not what you ordered. Frustrated, you call the waiter, expecting disappointment. But instead of a simple apology, the restaurant goes above and beyond. They quickly replace your meal, offer a complimentary dessert, and ensure you're treated with extra care for the rest of your visit. By the time you leave, you're actually more satisfied than you would have been if everything had gone smoothly from the start. This is the service recovery paradox, a counterintuitive phenomenon where customers sometimes end up more loyal and satisfied after a service failure than if no problem had occurred at all, provided the company handles the issue exceptionally well. The concept of the service recovery paradox, SRP, has been studied extensively in marketing and consumer behavior research. The idea is that when businesses respond to service failures in a way that exceeds customer expectations, they not only repair the damage, but also create an even stronger emotional bond with the customer. This was first explored in depth by researchers such as Hart, Heskett, and Sasser, 1990, who found that customers who experienced a well-handled recovery were often more likely to return than those who never encountered a problem. However, achieving this paradoxical effect is not as simple as just fixing a mistake. Studies suggest that for the service recovery paradox to occur, 4 key conditions must be met. 1. The failure must be seen as unusual or unexpected, rather than a recurring issue. 2. The recovery effort must be swift, sincere, and exceed expectations. 3. The customer must perceive the company as genuinely caring about making things right. 4. The resolution must be memorable enough to override the initial frustration. Real-world examples of the service recovery paradox can be found in many industries. Airlines, for instance, often compensate passengers for delays with free flight vouchers or upgrades, which can turn an inconvenient experience into a positive one. Hotels that accidentally overbook rooms sometimes offer affected guests free stays at luxury suites, leading to rave reviews rather than complaints. Even in e-commerce, companies like Amazon have built customer trust by offering instant refunds or replacements for defective products, making customers feel valued despite the initial issue. That said, the service recovery paradox has its limits. If failures happen too frequently, customers may lose trust in the brand rather than be impressed by the recovery efforts. Additionally, some industries, such as healthcare or finance, deal with critical services where even a single failure can be damaging, making recovery much harder. Interestingly, this paradox extends beyond business and into personal relationships. Think about a time when a friend or partner let you down, but then made up for it in such a heartfelt way that your relationship actually grew stronger. Just like in business, how someone responds to failure can sometimes matter more than the failure itself. Ultimately, the service recovery paradox is a reminder that mistakes are not always the end of a relationship, whether between a company and its customers or between individuals. What truly matters is how we respond to those mistakes. In the last, this paradox teaches us that setbacks, when handled with care and excellence, can become opportunities to build even greater trust and loyalty. 30. Twin paradox. Visualize a pair of twins, Alice and Bob. They are born on the same day, growing up side by side, sharing experiences. But one day, Alice embarks on a journey into deep space aboard a high-speed spacecraft, while Bob remains on Earth. Alice travels near the speed of light for what seems to be only a few years in her own experience before returning home. However, upon her return, she is shocked to find that Bob has aged far more than she has. This is the famous twin paradox, a fascinating thought experiment rooted in Einstein's theory of relativity, challenging our understanding of time and motion. The paradox arises from the concept of time dilation, a key prediction of Albert Einstein's special theory of relativity. According to this theory, time does not pass at the same rate for everyone. It is relative to an observer's speed. The faster an object moves relative to another, the slower time runs for it compared to the stationary observer. This means that for Alice, who is traveling at nearly the speed of light, time slows down relative to Bob, who remains on Earth. When she returns, she has aged only a few years, while Bob has experienced decades. At first glance, this seems paradoxical. If motion is relative, couldn't Alice claim that Bob was the one moving away from her? Shouldn't Bob have aged less instead? This is where the asymmetry of acceleration comes into play. Unlike Bob, Alice experiences acceleration and deceleration as she departs, turns around, and returns to Earth. This breaks the symmetry, making her experience different from Bob's and resolving the paradox. Einstein's general theory of relativity also explains that acceleration affects time, causing further slowing of Alice's clock compared to Bob's. Real-world experiments have confirmed the effects of time dilation. Atomic clocks placed on high-speed jets or satellites have been shown to tick at different rates compared to those on Earth, matching Einstein's predictions. GPS satellites, for instance, constantly experience time dilation due to their high orbital speeds, and their onboard clocks need to be corrected to stay synchronized with those on Earth. The twin paradox has profound implications for our understanding of time and space. If we could one day travel close to the speed of light, we could theoretically experience time travel into the future. For a space traveler on a journey lasting just a few years, centuries might pass back on Earth. This concept is often explored in science fiction, such as in movies like Interstellar, where astronauts experience time at a much slower rate than those on a planet affected by strong gravity. The paradox also raises deeper philosophical questions about the nature of time itself. Is time a fixed, universal entity, or is it truly relative? Can we ever escape the constraints of our own perception of time? In the last, the twin paradox is not just a theoretical puzzle, but a window into the strange and fascinating ways the universe works, reminding us that our everyday experience of time is only a small part of a much bigger cosmic reality. 31. Paradox of lottery. Envision yourself holding a lottery ticket, hopeful yet realistic about your chances. You know that winning is nearly impossible, yet someone must win. This paradox, often called the lottery paradox, challenges our understanding of rational belief, probability, and certainty. It presents a conflict between seemingly reasonable assumptions and the way we apply logic to uncertain situations. The paradox is usually framed like this. Suppose a fair lottery has 1 million tickets and only one will win. It seems rational to believe that any given ticket will lose because the probability of winning is extremely low, just 1 in 1 million. However, if we apply this logic to all tickets, we must conclude that no ticket will win, which contradicts the fact that one ticket must win. How can we reasonably believe that each individual ticket will lose while also knowing that one must be the winner? This paradox, introduced by Henry Keiberg in 1961, highlights the problem of rational acceptance. We naturally assign high confidence to statements based on probability, yet this does not always align with absolute truth. The lottery paradox forces us to question, when is it rational to believe something? If it is reasonable to believe each ticket will lose, why is it unreasonable to believe that all will lose? Philosophers often use this paradox to explore the limits of probabilistic reasoning and the nature of belief. One approach to resolving the paradox is by distinguishing between degrees of belief and certainty. While it may be rational to believe that any given ticket will lose, this belief is based on probability, not certainty. Another approach suggests that rational beliefs should be consistent, meaning we should not accept a set of beliefs that lead to contradictions. The paradox also has real-world implications beyond lotteries. Consider scientific hypotheses. Scientists accept theories based on overwhelming evidence, but no theory is ever absolutely certain. Similarly, in legal systems, courts may convict based on strong evidence without absolute proof. The lottery paradox raises the question, how much certainty do we need before we can say something is true? Another interpretation of this paradox relates to decision-making and risk. In financial investments, for example, we may assume that most risky ventures will fail, yet some succeed spectacularly. This highlights the tension between individual probabilities and overall outcomes. In everyday life, we navigate uncertainty constantly, whether predicting the weather, making business decisions, or even deciding whether to cross the street. The paradox reminds us that while probability helps guide our beliefs, certainty is often an illusion. In the last, the lottery paradox is not just about gambling. It is a profound challenge to our understanding of knowledge, logic, and decision-making. It forces us to confront the limits of rationality, showing that even the simplest assumptions can lead to deep philosophical puzzles. As we reach the end of this exploration into paradoxes, we see how they challenge our perceptions, stretch the limits of logic, and force us to rethink the way we understand reality. From the mind-bending nature of time travel to the contradictions of belief and probability, each paradox reveals hidden complexities in the way we process information and make decisions. These puzzles are not just abstract thought experiments. They influence philosophy, science, psychology, and even our daily lives. Paradoxes remind us that the world is not always as straightforward as it seems. They encourage curiosity, critical thinking, and a deeper appreciation for the mysteries that surround us. In questioning the impossible, we push the boundaries of knowledge and open doors to new ways of understanding. So, as you step away from these paradoxes, keep in mind that sometimes the most perplexing questions lead to the most profound insights. Perhaps, in embracing uncertainty and contradiction, we come closer to the truth than we ever imagined. Good night.